response, the red-haired woman repaid him with hellfire, commanding her men to set Dark Kenneth aflame. The fire engulfed him, fed by the tar. She watched as the heat continued to consume his body, only until the last embarrassed figure lay amidst a pile of ashes. The Mackenzies counted themselves among the Jacobites, those who sought to restore the house of Stuart to the British throne. Now, as such, Brahan Castle became the site of a battle in November of 1715 during the Jacobite Rising. The resulting defeat left the estate in the hands of the English. From their new headquarters in Brahan Castle, British forces began a brutal pacification campaign against the Highlands, stripping clan chieftains of power, weapons, and seizing other estates and banning cultural symbols like the tartan and the kilt. The Mackenzies, once proud owners of the Brahan Castle, were the first clan to concede defeat in 1745, swearing fealty to the crown of the very steps of their ancestral home. Now, Brahan Castle passed between several owners in the intervening centuries, in and out of Mackenzie hands, and in the early 19th century, it was reworked into a country home. It stayed that way for around 100 years before being re-questioned for a time during World War II. The post-war era was not kind to the building, however, and the estate fell into disrepair, brought on by a case of dry rot. By the early 1950s, Brahan Castle has been mostly demolished, save for a single wall on the north side. The once grand home of the Mackenzies had become nothing more than a garden ornament, and soon even this came down. Today, the plot is empty. But how could such magnificent grounds, once owned by such a prominent family, find themselves completely wiped off the map? A hint can be found at marker 18 miles to the west. It commemorates the fall of the House Mackenzie and the Seaforth dynasty, as well as the site of an execution. The plaque reads, "This stone commemorates the legend, and forgive me Scots if I'm pronouncing this wrong, of Cognac Odhar, better known as the Brahan Seer. Many of his prophecies were fulfilled, and tradition holds that his ultimately death by burning in tar followed his final prophecy of the doom of the House of Seaforth." Now, despite his enduring legacy, details surrounding this gentleman are largely shrouded in mystery. He went by many names: Sallow Kenneth the Enchanter, Dark Kenneth the Sorcerer, the Brahan Seer, etc. Now, some identify him simply as Kenneth Mackenzie, though his exact relationship with the house he cursed remains speculative. It is possible he was distant kin to the Seaforth Mackenzies who held Brahan Castle. At the same time, it was common for anyone working a clan to take the Lord's last name as their own in a show of solidarity. To make matters more complicated, there's even some debates as to whether Dark Kenneth even existed at all. Some maintain that 19th century folklorist Alexander Mackenzie invented the Brahan Seer out of whole cloth, since little historical documentation supports his existence. I mean, the only tangible bit of evidence is an October 1577 writ of arrest. The order tasked law enforcement with rounding up 6 men and 26 women accused of the diabolical practices of magic, enchantment, murder, homicide, and other offenses. The final name on that list is that of one of Keenock Ower, a phoneticized rendition of Dark Kenneth's Gaelic name. The document describes this individual as a leading or principal enchantress, likely a misgendered mistake penned by an English officer unfamiliar with the language of the Highlands. An earlier commission demands the arrest of the same individual, involved in a failed magical murder-for-hire plot from that same year. Now, in some ways, the exact name of the seer doesn't matter too much to the story. If Dark Kenneth did not exist, someone similar did, and the prophecy laying at the feet of the Mackenzies echoed through the Highlands long before the mythicized legend took hold. And, unlike so many other curses, these words came to pass just as foretold. Now, according to the stories, Dark Kenneth had moved to Bran from the Isle of Lewis. His life was like of most residents living in the northern Scotland in the 17th century. He worked the land of Brahan Castle like his neighbors, toiling in the fields and peat bogs before retiring to his humble home, where a nip of whiskey kept him warm through the long, cold nights. Now, by all accounts, if he had one true flaw, it was his sharp, cynical wit, a reputation that would eventually lead to his own demise at the hands of the Seaforth Mackenzies. What truly set Dark Kenneth apart from his fellow countrymen was his unique talent for the two sides. Few people of the era, even those educated in the urban center of Edinburgh, or as some said, Edinburgh or Edinburgh, denied the fact that certain talented individuals were bestowed with the gift of prophecy, able to peer through the mist of time and deliver predictions with shocking accuracy. Dark Kenneth was such an individual. People far and wide would flock to his hovel, plying him with liquor long into the evening. Smoke from the fire and his pipe would fill the room almost as thickly as his barbs and jests. Weathering this sarcasm, visitors would watch Dark Kenneth get more and more drunk until without warning he would just lapse into a trance. Right? So his frame, once limbered by alcohol, would become fiercely rigid as if another presence had stepped into his body. His right eye would roll backwards into his head, leaving only the white exposed. His other eye, which was always lazy, would remain facing forward. And with a swift jerk, Dark Kenneth's hand would raise his famous seeing stone up to his left eye, and he would begin his predictions, which wailed up from his gut in a hoarse sing-song. Rarely was the bringer of good news. Dark Kenneth's prophecies were often chilling and gloomy, or most famously known as a doomer. One of his most famous predictions, which, unlike many of his others, has yet to be clearly fulfilled, warned that sheep shall eat men, men will eat sheep, the black rain will eat all things. In the end, old men shall return from new lands. Dark Kenneth's other claims are easier to understand, with a successful track record earning him the nickname the Scottish Nostradamus. Many of Dark Kenneth's visions foretold local events. At one point, he told villagers that a black hornless cow will give birth to a calf with two heads, which apparently did come to pass sometime afterward. Now, Dark Kenneth predicted the downfall of the Fairburn Mackenzies, saying, "The day will come when the Mackenzies of Fairburn shall lose their entire possessions, and that branch of the clan shall disappear almost to a man from the face of the earth. Their castle shall become uninhabited, desolate, and forsaken, and a cow shall give birth to a calf in the uppermost chamber in the Fairburn Tower." While at first absurd, it unfolded just as Dark Kenneth had predicted. The last of the Fairburn Mackenzies passed away unwed in 1850. Their castle fell into ruin, and the following year a calf was born in the tower. In 1841, part of a natural rock formation along the Scottish coastline collapsed, startling a nearby herd of cattle that had wandered far from their pasture. They broke out into a full-blown stampede, and this too had been foreseen by the Dark Kenneth. Centuries earlier, he had said that this exact landmark would crash so loud as to cause the laird of Leadmore's cattle 20 miles away to break their tethers. Other visions from Dark Kenneth predicted the construction of local canals and even the arrival of the railroad. The day will come when long strings of carriages without horses shall run between Dingwall and Inverness, and more wonderful still, between Dingwall and the Isle of Skye. He said, long before anyone had even conceived the idea of locomotives. In the spring of 1994, the English Channel was opened. Heralded as a marvel of modern engineering, the submerged tunnel linked England and France, allowing for easy travel underneath the English Channel. 4 years later, in July of 99, the Scottish Parliament, closed for nearly 3 centuries, had reopened. Dark Kenneth had said that both would come to pass. When men go in horseless carriages, go under the seat of France, the Scotia shall rise away from all oppression, he had declared. And some of Dark Kenneth's claims had serious ramifications. Most dramatically, he prophesied that when it becomes possible to cross the River Ness, dry shod in 5 places, a frightful disaster will strike the world. In late August of 1939, a 5th bridge was indeed built across the river, and within days, Germany invaded Poland, kicking off World War II. Dark Kenneth also said that the 9th bridge constructed over the River Ness would herald fire, flood, and calamity. Some believe that this prediction came to pass on July 6, 1988, when the Piper Alpha oil platform exploded, sinking into the North Sea. The Piper Alpha disaster was one of the most expensive in history, estimated at a loss of £1.7 billion and cost 165 workers their lives. Now, shortly thereafter, more tragedy struck. A flood on the River Ness swept away 127-year-old railway bridge. Next, the Pan Am Flight 123 crashed on Lockerbie, Scotland, sending part of the town into flames, annihilating almost 300 people. Only 2 years after the River Ness's 9th bridge had been completed, fire, flood, and calamity had all unfolded, just as Dark Kenneth had warned. This guy's got something going on. I mean, am I right? However, Dark Kenneth's miraculous talents were not innate. While he may have had a talent for the two sights, he still required the aid of his seeing stone to accurately describe his visions. But because of this, the seeing stone was never out of Dark Kenneth's reach. Kept at his side at all times, most descriptions say that the stone was small and glistened white. It was either hollow or, in most versions, had a hole in the center. No one knows exactly how Dark Kenneth acquired this mystical artifact. One legend holds that shortly after relocating to Brahan, he had simply taken a break while cutting peats. The warm sunshine lulled him to sleep, and when he awoke, the seeing stone was either sitting on his chest or beneath his head, depending on the retelling. Dark Kenneth immediately looked through it, leaving him blind in his left eye. Now, despite this loss, doing so allowed him to see that an enemy had poisoned the midday meal that his wife had brought to him. The stone saved his life. Another legend has Dark Kenneth finding the seeing stone in a raven's nest. This seems to echo Norse-German folklore, where a magical raven stone or stone of victory could be obtained by stealing the bird's eggs, boiling them, and replacing them in the nest. When the chicks fail to emerge, the mother raven flies off and returns with a magical stone to encourage her eggs to hatch. Raven stones, which in some versions are made from the eyes of criminals, plucked by ravens as they hang dead on the gallows, can then be stolen, bestowing their owners with the power of clairvoyance. One of the more popular origin stories of Dark Kenneth's seeing stone says that it was a gift from his mother, who had acquired it on the Isle of Lewis. One evening, when he was but a wee babe, his mother was herding sheep when the flock wandered onto an ancient Norse burial ground. To her horror, the ghosts of the dead erupted from their graves, disappearing over the hills and into the night. Dark Kenneth must have inherited his boldness from his mother, because she bravely remained at the burial grounds through the entire evening, awaiting the spirit's return. As the first golden rays of dawn began peering over the island, the ghosts returned to their graves, which sealed behind them, except for one which remained open. Dark Kenneth's mother laid her staff over the open hole of the final resting place. The last ghost finally returned, but instead of diving into the ground, it simply hovered, unsure of what to do. This was because the staff belonging to Dark Kenneth's mother was fashioned out of rowan. Now, according to folklore of Ireland, the British Isles, and Scotland, rowan has magical properties and can be used to fend off all manner of supernatural entities, from fairies to ghosts. Dark Kenneth's mother stared at the spirit. It seemed to be a beautiful lady, her long hair bound in a golden band. At last, the ghost spoke to her captor, explaining that she was once the daughter of a Norwegian king, long since drowned in the icy waters of the cold North Sea. One night each year, she and the other spirits were permitted to return to their homes, but since her kingdom was so far away, she always seemed to be the last to return. The spirit glanced to the horizon, which grew steadily brighter by the minute. Was there a room in her captor's heart to allow her to return to the land of the dead? Dark Kenneth's mother removed her staff. As a show of thanks, the Norwegian princess's ghost gave her a hollow stone, sparkling white in the early dawn. She told her to give it to her child when he turned 7 years of age, and that it would give him the ability to see in the future. The ghost then sank into her grave. Dark Kenneth's mother quietly ushered her flock back to the pasture. For years, Dark Kenneth's mother kept the seeing stone in a safe place, raising her son until he was old enough to appreciate this miraculous gift. Finally, on his 7th birthday, The boy received the stone. It was a thing of beauty. His mother encouraged him to peer into the stone's dazzling facets. Looking through the hole, the boy saw not the room around him, but a cave far down the shoreline. Waves lapped at the mouth of the cave, spilling over the rocks and across the body of a whale. Dark Kenneth shared this vision with his mother, who in turn told the villagers. After a quick search, they located the cave, and just as the boy had described, the beached whale. Thus began Dark Kenneth's reputation as an especially gifted seer. There is yet another version of this tale. This time, the Norwegian princess instructs Dark Kenneth's mother to pluck 2 white stones from her grave. She says that, should they be used to help others, they will bring her unborn son good fortune. Dark Kenneth's mother selects a pair of stones, but as she does so, the ghost issues a warning. Your son will help a red-haired woman, and she will repay him with hellfire. In this story, Dark Kenneth is born and his mother tosses the stones into a deep well. When he reaches adulthood and the well runs dry, Dark Kenneth finds the stones, but his mother warns him, never help any woman with red hair, lest you meet your doom. Interestingly, you might find your own seeing stone today. Dark Kenneth's magical artifact sounds like it may have been a hagstone. If so, these rocks are quite common and exist in a variety of sizes and are made from several types of minerals. All of them feature a hole through the center. It is believed that the hole in hagstones occur when mollusks latch onto rocks, drilling deep to securely fasten themselves against the pull of the tides and attacks from predators. Now, over the years, erosion further widens the hole and smooths the rock. Similar erosion may cause the holes to form naturally in the absence of the mollusks over the course of centuries. The unique appearance of hagstones has given birth to a rich set of beliefs surrounding these objects. They might be called witch stones, adder stones, or serpent's eggs. Many cultures, from the Egyptians to the Druids, held that stones possessed magic power which could be passed on to the owner. This included warding off evil or increasing fertility. Anyone peering through the center hole might see invisible creatures, reveal the identity of witches in disguise, or, as in Dark Kenneth's case, perceive the future. Mr. Kenneth was sought far and wide for his gift of prophecy. Both the rich and the poor flocked to his hut to learn what events might come to pass, although only the latter seemed to genuinely appreciate him. The lords, ladies, and clergy of the region sought Dark Kenneth's advice grudgingly. Only his track record for success kept him safe from the upper class, who were willing to overlook his sharp tongue and pagan habits for a chance to see their future. Thus, Dark Kenneth was kept safe from prosecution, but he may have grown too confident for his own good, because in 1662, it seems that his luck ran out. Dark Kenneth and his employer shared a name. Lord Kenneth Mackenzie, patriarch of the Seaforth Mackenzies, 3rd Earl of Bran and Kintail, had just been dispatched on a diplomatic mission to France. He left behind his new wife Isabella, the daughter of a local lord. Isabella was attractive but shrewd and, in a crucial detail, sported flowing locks of red hair. This summer, while Lord Mackenzie was away, Lady Isabella threw a party for the workers and tenants of the Brahan estate. Dark Kenneth was in attendance, and so was his offensive wit. He overheard a lackey who, seeking to compliment Lady Isabella, said that he had never beheld such a fine gathering of gentlemen's children. Dark Kenneth couldn't help himself and responded that he saw more children of footmen and grooms than of the gentry, implying that the noble ladies were sleeping with the help. As soon as he spoke the words, Dark Kenneth realized his mistake. One wonders what was going on through his mind at the time. Did he remember the ghost warning to avoid red-haired women? Even if he did not, the smartest course of action was to immediately leave the party, and that is exactly what he did. But it was too late. Either Lady Isabella overheard Dark Kenneth's remark, or someone passed it on to her through gossip. In any case, she flew into a fit of rage. Why had her husband tolerated his insubordination for so long? Too long had she endured cynical jest from this lowly sorcerer, and with the Lord Mackenzie away, now was the perfect chance to put an end to his disrespect. According to one version, Lady Isabella tracked down Dark Kenneth immediately, putting him to death on the spot. Another version, by far the most common, holds that Dark Kenneth went underground for a time, only resurfacing after Lady Isabella put out the word that she had forgiven him for his rudeness. He returned to his hovel, only to be summoned by her days later, under the pretense that she sought a birthday gift from him. Dark Kenneth arrived at Brahan Castle on Lady Isabella's birthday. He had nothing to fear. His confidence had returned, everything was forgiven, and after all, the day was much too bright and sunny for anything to go wrong. Now, despite the warm weather, he arrived at court to find Lady Isabella sitting alongside a roaring fireplace. She looked disheveled, the firelight igniting an evil gleam in her tired, red-rimmed eyes. Kenneth immediately broke into a sweat, at this point unsure whether it was from fire or the slow creep of nervousness welling up within him. The lady wanted a gift, he knew, and all he had to offer was prophecy. He asked her, "Lady, what do you want to know?" Without so much as a greeting, she commanded him, "Use your stone. Tell me if my lord is well." Dark Kenneth nodded. "First," he said, "tell me where he is." Lady Isabella's face contorted with contempt. "Paris!" she shouted, knowing he knew full well where Lord Mackenzie was. "Look into the stone," she urged. "Tell me!" And Dark Kenneth lifted his eye-seeing stone to his left eye. Left eye. He watched for a moment, then broke into peals of laughter. When he lowered the stone, he could see that Lady Isabella did not share his amusement. "Why do you laugh?" she sneered, and Dark Kenneth took a deep breath, chose his words carefully. "Fear not for your lord," he replied diplomatically. "He is safe and sound, well and hearty, merry and happy." This wasn't good enough for Lady Isabella. "What do you mean happy?" she barked. "Where is he? What is he doing?" Dark Kenneth didn't need the second sight to see that things were about to take a turn for the worse. "Ask no more questions," he begged. "Be content he is well and happy." Lady Isabella continued to press him, shouting, "But where is he? Who is he with? When is he coming home?" There is no easy way out of this predicament. Telling the truth would mean his death, but lying would ruin his reputation. He chose his words carefully, stripping all emotion from his voice as he said, "I see your lord in a magnificent room. He is in fine company and far too agreeably occupied to think of leaving Paris." It would have been worse if Lady Isabella had shouted at him or been visibly angry. Instead, what happened was much more chilling. The slightest smile appeared on her face, and she whispered, "Tell me now, Seer. Tell me what you saw." The time for discretion had passed. Dark Kenneth knew that if this was to be his end, let it be an end met with truth rather than cowardice. He cleared his throat with full confidence and said, "Since you want to know what will only displease you, I will tell you the truth. Your lord has little thought of you or his children and his home. I saw him in a gay, gilded room, grandly dressed in velvet, silk, and cloth of gold. He was on his knees to a fair lady, his arm around her waist, his lips pressed to her hand. That is the truth." Lady Isabella staggered, pushed away the manservant who rushed to steady her, and recovered. While obviously surprised by both the vision and Dark Kenneth's honesty, she nonetheless took bittersweet satisfaction in confirming her suspicions and at last justifying her hate of the seer. Lady Isabella took a deep breath and calmly spoke. "You have spoken evil of dignities. You have defamed a great chief in the eye of his servants. You have abused my hospitality and outraged my feelings. You have sullied the good name of my lord in the hall of my ancestors. You shall suffer the death." With that, a knife pricked the small of Dark Kenneth's back, but it was not the killing blow. He was only being held until Lady Isabella decided what manner of torture would end his life. In a flash, Dark Kenneth pivoted from fear to anger. If they didn't have enough honor to finish him on the spot, there was still time to enact his revenge, the wrath of the old gods. With calm rage, Dark Kenneth raised his seeing stone to his left eye once more. Before him, a vision slowly coalesced. Whether it was a curse from his own soul or a prophecy of events fated to occur, no one knows. All we know is that it was fulfilled. Dark Kenneth delivered his final prediction. I see into the future, far into the future, and I read the doom of the race of my oppressor," he began. "The long descended line of Seaforth will, ere many generations have passed, end in extinction and sorrow. I see a chief, the last of his house, both deaf and dumb. He will be the father of 4 fair sons, all of whom will follow him to the tomb. He will live careworn and die mourning, knowing that the honors of his line are to be extinguished forever, and that no future chief of the Mackenzies shall bear rule at the Brahan or Kintail. After lamenting over the last and most promising of his sons, he himself shall sink into the grave, and the remnant of his possessions shall be inherited by a white-hooded lassie from the east, and she is to kill her sister. And, as a sign by which it may be known that these things are coming to pass, there shall be 4 great lords in the days of the last deaf and dumb Seaforth, of whom one shall be buck-toothed, another hare-lipped, another half-witted, and the 4th a stammerer." Dark Kenneth finished these words and lowered the stone to take in the ashen faces surrounding him. Lady Isabella gestured for him to be taken to the lowest portions of the castle, where he would languish until she decided his fate. Before he could be seized, however, Dark Kenneth raised the seeing stone to his left eye one final time, completing his curse. The chiefs, thus distinguished, will be allies and neighbors of the last Seaforth, and when he looks around and sees them, he may know that his sons are doomed, that his broad lands shall pass to strangers, and that his race shall come to an end. And of the great house of Brahan not a stone shall remain. Replacing the seeing stone in the pouch of his waist, Dark Kenneth waited for Lady Isabella's response. "You will die at dawn," she said as he was dragged away. As with other aspects of the tale, there exists some disagreement as to when the prophecy was delivered. Other versions say the Seaforth doom, as it came to be known, was spoken by Dark Kenneth moments before his death. Others say he was turned over to the church, which was more than happy to execute him for being a witch. He was either burned alive or hanged. The most popular retelling sees Dark Kenneth escorted to the coastline at Chancery Point, where his commemorative marker stands today. Along the way, he hurled his seeing stone from the path, and when it hit the ground, a spring began gushing up from the earth, growing over the years until it became a full-sized loch. After their long march to the sea, Dark Kenneth finally arrived at Chancery Point. Awaiting him was a barrel full of tar, iron spikes pointing inward at odd angles to further enhance his suffering. Lady Isabella's soldiers thrust him headfirst into the barrel, dunking him over and over again until his entire body was covered with tar and deep lacerations. At last, they pulled him from the barrel, sitting him before her. "You shall never go to heaven," Lady Isabella had sneered. Dark Kenneth coughed, black sludge gushing from his mouth. From beneath his coat of tar, he choked out one final rebuke. "I will go to heaven, but you shall never," he mumbled to the ooze. "This shall be a sign whereby you can determine whether my condition after death is one of everlasting happiness or of eternal misery. A raven and a dove, swiftly flying in opposite directions, will meet, and for a second hover over my ashes, on which they will instantly alight. If the raven be foremost, you have spoken truly, but if the dove, then my hope is well founded." Lady Isabella could not believe it. Dark Kenneth was stubborn to the last. In response, the red-haired woman repaid him with hellfire, commanding her men to set Dark Kenneth aflame. The fire engulfed him, fed by the tar. She watched as the heat continued to consume his body, only until the last embarrassed figure lay amidst a pile of ashes. It was done. No longer would Lady Isabella be forced to endure the seer's endless hostility. She turned to leave. But as she did so, something in the sky caught her eye. It was a bird, no, 2 birds. One light and the other dark, a dove and a raven traveling towards each other in opposite directions. She watched as the birds met each other over the remains of her foe, hovering ever so slightly before plummeting towards the ashes. The dove landed first. Even though he himself had left the earth, the curse which Dark Kenneth delivered remained, seeping into the mind of Lady Isabella and even the land itself. Slowly, people all over the highlands learned of the Seaforth doom, a legend which outlived those it cursed. Even novelist and poet Sir Walter Scott spoke of the curse, having heard it passed down from generation to generation. But Dark Kenneth's prophecy did not take long to start unfolding. Lord Mackenzie, hearing of his wife's actions, returned from Paris to Scotland, when he rode his horse so hard that it died beneath him on the way. 15 years later, he himself passed away. Lady Isabella outlived him by nearly 40 years, her unpopular reputation continuing to grow until her death in 1715. But even before Lady Isabella's demise, the Seaforth Mackenzies began suffering from bad luck. Members of the extended family died in war, all the way through World War II. Lord Mackenzie's son, the 4th Earl of Seaforth, was eventually exiled for political reasons. Lady Isabella's grandson, William, the 5th Earl, lost his lands and title the same year she died, and when Brahan Castle fell into the hands of the crown, William's son managed to recover the Seaforth estates, including the castle, but the Highlands themselves continued to suffer, their culture obliterated by the English, with clans forcibly removed to allow grazing for profitable sheep flocks. The Prophecies' endgame began truly unfolding in 1755 after the birth of Francis Humberston Mackenzie, the last of his name. As part of his education, Francis attended a boarding school when he was 12 years old. However, a scarlet fever epidemic swept through the land, and numerous children at the school, including Francis, fell victim. Francis and 15 other students were held in the sick house dormitory while they recuperated. On one occasion, the nurse on duty heard Francis frantically calling out for help. She found him in the throes of fever, mumbling incoherently. When she finally teased out him what was wrong, he shared with her a horrific story. Francis had awoken during the night to find a hideous old crone drifting into the room. The woman had some sort of wallet or pouch dangling from her neck, and without a sound, she hovered from bed to bed, surveying each child. She passed by the first bed, but stopped at the second. As the moments dragged on, the specter reached into the pouch and produced a mallet and wooden peg. To Francis's horror, she approached the boy, placed the peg on his forehead, and hammered it in deep with one blow. The hag then removed the peg and continued her rounds, floating from child to child, either leaving them alone or repeating this gruesome act. At last, she appeared at the foot of Francis's bed. She stared at him for several long moments before her hand reached up to her pouch and pulled out the peg, and then replaced it. It seemed as if he had been spared. The crone continued to stare at him before quietly disappearing through the same door she had entered. That was when Francis began screaming. He was convinced that it was not a dream, insisting that the nurse fetch a doctor to record his account. His request was granted, and a doctor carefully took notes on which boys had been struck and which had been left alone. To a person, each child struck with the peg died, while the others, including Francis, recovered. Francis had not emerged from his illness without consequences, however. Scarlet fever had left him completely deaf, and for years he remained unable to speak. It was exactly as Dark Kenneth had predicted. I see a chief and the last of his house, both deaf and dumb. Francis's life continued to unfold according to the curse. At first, all seemed well. He served in Parliament, presided over the Seaforth holdings, and even became Governor Barbados. He married Mary Proby, with whom he fathered 6 daughters and 4 sons, as Dark Kenneth had predicted. It is unclear if these 4 sons suffered the maladies that Dark Kenneth described. Most never had the chance, however. 2, William and George, died in infancy. The other 2 survived, although one of them died in childhood. It is unknown whether or not any of them had a cleft palate. There is no record of any of the surviving sons stuttering either, but in some cases this is a treatable condition that any well-placed family would have certainly sought to remedy. Perhaps if young William and George had not died, one of them would have been a stammerer, as Dark Kenneth had foretold. One of the sons may also have been half-witted, although this might have been a matter of opinion. We do know, however, that Francis's sole surviving son, also named William, did have a buck tooth, according to contemporary eyewitness testimony. William Mackenzie survived into adulthood, eventually serving as a member of the Parliament himself before falling ill. He passed away. As Dark Kenneth had foretold, William's father, Francis Mackenzie had 4 sons, all of whom had died before him. He was to be the last of the Seaforth Mackenzies. Now remember that Dark Kenneth had said that this sole surviving member of the bloodline would live careworn and die mourning before sinking into the grave. This is exactly what Francis Mackenzie did. Racked by grief, he lapsed into despair, lamenting over the last and most promising of his sons, just as predicted. He died barely 2 months after his last son passed away, leaving behind no male heir. Yet, Francis Mackenzie's daughters have a role to play in this story as well. After selling off his properties in Kintail, Francis left the Brahan estate to his eldest daughter, Mary Frederica. She moved to Barbados, where her father had served as governor. There, she met and wed Sir Samuel Hood. Tragically, he died only a month before Mary's father. Inconsolable, Mary returned to Brahan from Barbados in 1816, fulfilling Dark Kenneth's prediction that a lassie from the east would inherit the Seaforth Mackenzie holdings. But what of the second part of the portion of the prophecy, the part where his sister inherits kill her sister? Within 7 years, this too came true. Mary and one of her sisters, Caroline, were traveling together in Mary's light, 2-wheeled carriage, while her horses bolted. The carriage overturned and Caroline died on the Brahan property. A monument was erected 1 mile west of the castle, where it stands to this day. And since the carriage and horses both belonged to Mary, it can be said that she, in essence, killed her sister. Mary remarried, eventually selling the ancient Mackenzie holdings, and the rest, as they say, is history. The Brahan property passed through different hands before slowly fading away. Today, there's nothing but an empty field. Every stone, every bit of foundation has been removed, thus fulfilling the final words of Dark Kenneth. And of the great house of Brahan, not a stone shall remain. Admittedly, Dark Kenneth and Brahan Seer may have been fiction, but it seems that his curse was very real. The Seaforth branch of the Mackenzie family tree has been pruned forever, and an empty field southwest of Dingwall attests to that fact. But more importantly, I want to know what you guys think. Is there really such thing as a Scottish curse by Dark Kenneth that affected an entire family line, or did these just happen to be a set of coincidental circumstances that led up to the fulfillment of the curse? I want to know what you guys think in the comments down below, so please, I would love to hear your thoughts. And more importantly, if you guys enjoyed today's story, be sure to go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. And as always, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll check you guys out in the very next video.